Hillbilly Elegy, eh? Um, this is the new Ron Howard movie. Now, this is the second movie he's done this year. The first was a documentary about some out of control California wildfires that came out a
Right.
few months ago. That was probably one of the best movies I've seen the year.
Okay.
Uh, uh, Compared to this.
Wow.
Now,
Yeah.
I just want to set the table here. I am not going to be one of the chorus of film critics who has been bashing Hillbilly Elegy. I've not read the reviews because I literally just finished watching this movie about 20 minutes ago. I've got a lot of
Right.
problems with it, but I also kind of like a lot of things in it. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
mixed review for me.
Yeah.
But I don't know. You forwarded me an article from Collider saying it was a laughably bad film. Have you read some of the commentary surrounding this? And also, just let's kick off with
Uh,
what did you think of the movie overall?
I went in knowing that, you know, it's the the downside of social media, right? It's like you start to or Twitter or whatever, I guess that's social media. Um, you you start to see your colleagues talking about movies that you haven't seen yet,
Yeah.
and like, oh, okay, and of course they're like, oh, this is the worst movie of the year, or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, thanks for the hyperbole. But some of us haven't seen it yet. Um, and honestly, this movie wasn't even. I didn't know about the book. This movie wasn't on my radar. I didn't even know what was going on. It's 2020, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I'm like, oh, Ron Howard. Wow, is that Glenn Close? Oh, Amy Adams. Okay, well, all right, let's give this a shot. But at the same time, I was seeing all these, not necessarily reading the reviews, but seeing some of their ratings and seeing some of the titles of their articles. Like, I'm like, okay, come on now. And so I went into Hillbilly Elegy. It's got to be a tongue twister to keep on saying that, right?
Yeah.
Hillbilly Elegy, Hillbilly Elegy.
We can call it he for short if you want.
What the he?
Yeah.
I went in there with knowing that. I went into watching the movie knowing that, and I watched it with my wife, and we were both like, there was a point, I like the way the movie, it has a certain approach. I don't know if I want to say style, but an approach to it that is kind of somewhat herky-jerky as far as like editing wise and cinematography, which I didn't mind,
Yeah.
because it makes sense to me when you look at the context of the storyteller. But there was a point where I think halfway through, maybe a little bit over halfway through, my wife was like, and she was talking about Glenn Close. She's like, I can't figure out if if she's overacting or if it's just too much or if it's just she's really good at playing this character. And I'm like, I'm with you. But at the end, I didn't think it's as bad as all these critics are making it out to be. I'm kind of on the fence with the movie overall, but I think there's some good things here.
Yeah.
I think that there's some big acting, um, but and I think there's some broad strokes and big acting. Sure, there's not a whole lot of nuance. There are some rare, really great quiet moments in this movie that I wish there were more of. But overall, I was fine with it. I didn't think it's the worst. I don't think it's the worst movie of the year.
Yeah, and we've kind of talked about this before. I think either of us had seen it, that there's people are calling it, the new Green Book.
Yeah,
First of all, I don't. Well,
which would be fine for you.
Well, yeah, because I am an unabashed fan of Green Book, and we talked about that when it came out. But because we're in COVID season, I don't even know if this is going to be on anyone's Oscar radar, if it has a chance of getting a Best Picture nom despite the pedigree of, Amy
Mm,
Adams and Glenn Close and Ron Howard, partially because, there's been so much negative press around it. I don't know if that affects the Academy, or, a lot of times you'll see, especially in the 10 picture expanded categories, some of those nominees get in there because of box office. There's no box
yeah.
office. It's just on Netflix. So I don't, I don't know.
Well,
Without
honestly,
those
that
X factors, I don't know how this movie gets the boost that it needs to be elevated like that.
well, that's the boost. The fact that it's on Netflix. I
Yeah.
mean, this could have been a Ron Howard. I don't know. It could have been maybe a Ron Howard art house film. I doubt it, but I think more people would be open to seeing this on at home on Netflix than actually like getting in a car and going and seeing. I don't know. Would they call it "Let's go see the new Ron Howard movie," or would they call it "Let's go see the latest Amy Adams, Glenn Close Oscar grab"? I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, what would be the draw there? You know,
Yeah, and that's kind of why I'm more curious about this award season than I have been about award seasons past, because usually there is some
sure,
kind of a buzz, like a
yeah,
festival buzz or a box office buzz, like, the kind of the dark horse surprise hit. Like no one thought anything about Hillbilly Elegy, but everyone went to see it in the first 2 weeks and it became
yeah,
important. So
yeah.
and that's the thing is, Green Book had the benefit of being, a movie that a lot of people went to see, and it got sort of buzz
Word of
and
mouth. Yeah,
yeah, and I think it earned its spot at the award show. This movie is really kind of goofy, and I was reminded of the Butterfly Effect. Did you remember that? Did you ever see that, the Ashton Kutcher
Ashton
movie
Kutcher.
from
Yeah,
2004?
I'm curious to know how you were reminded of that.
My wife and I went to go see that, and it's a film that it's like 2 hours long, I think. But for at least the first hour, we kept looking at each other, leaning over and whispering, Do you want to leave? We can go, right? Should we just go?" Because I don't know if you've seen the movie, but it is about child abuse and dysfunctional childhood, kids in the 70s.
Oh,
And
wow.
there's a lot of horrible things that go on that I was surprised, frankly, was in a mainstream feature.
Hmm.
Not only just like kids bullying each other, but like sexual abuse. And I think at one point a kid burns a dog inside a burlap sack for
Oh,
fun.
wow.
And I'm
Okay.
like, yeah, we're like,
Well, there's some of that in here too.
well, but what I'm saying is,
Yeah.
we stuck it out, and at the end we were glad that we did, because as disturbing as that stuff was, it did help with the context of this weird kind of time travel story that was going on in that movie. And
Gotcha.
it's sort of the same thing here. This movie is so ugly in the characters just making constant bad decisions with no clear map or indication that things are going to get any better for any of them. So at a certain point, I didn't check out. I just wondered, is this just going to be the next hour of my life after this first part? Now, it did
Yeah.
redeem itself, but honestly, the 20 minutes I think that are worthwhile really in this movie come towards the end, where
Hmm.
Glenn Close's character, Mama, she's taking in young JD, who's like a
Yeah.
12 or 13-year-old kid whose mother is a drug addict played by Amy Adams. She sort of takes custody of him, almost like like the hillbilly version of Let Him Go. uh, you know
That's true.
um and she teaches him to straighten up, and to get some
Hmm.
ambition, and to nurture him along in her own kind of dysfunctional way. And I
Right.
was like, I could watch an entire movie about that. You're reminded
So
of kind of
just
like
those two.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like almost like a Karate Kid kind of mentorship with Daniel and Mr. Miyagi. uh that was really special stuff. But the bookend, or the gateway into this story, I had a real problem with. This is based on a memoir by J.D. Vance, who's a real
Hmm.
guy.
Hmm.
The bulk of the story takes place between 1997 and I think 2011, 2013, because he's like 12 years old in 97, and then flash forward to when he's in Yale Law School.
Early 20s.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's struggling. He's trying to get like a internship at a law firm for the summer. Otherwise, he won't be able to go back to school. And there's the drama there. So he's
Hmm.
flashing back to his childhood, especially because he gets word that his mom has overdosed again. Uh, that setup was interesting, except that when we see older JD, we learn that from that 12-year-old kid, he went on to graduate high school, went into the Marines, served in, I think, Iraq or Afghanistan,
Hmm.
left, went to Yale. Watching this character, I didn't buy any of that. That's not a Marine. You know, that a Marine, typically the Marines that I've known in my life, and
Hmm.
the cliche is of discipline. They break you down to build you back up, not only just to become a killing machine, but also to have, discipline and fight to it and get whatever you want out of life, and, go for it kind of a thing. When he sits down with these law partners at this fancy dinner, and he snaps at one of the partners, who makes a comment about rednecks, and he's like, "My mom was salutatorian at her high school, sir," and like all this other stuff. I'm like,
You're smarter than anybody in this room. I'm like,
right,
what?
right. I'm like, there. I don't believe that this guy got that far, as far as he did in Yale, to get to this place where he's got a spot at that dinner table where he's seriously in contention for a job at a law firm. He just doesn't strike me as a lawyerly type. Um, there's that whole weird fish out of water thing where he's calling up his girlfriend saying, "There's so many forks. I don't know how to deal with all the forks," the place settings of the table. I'm like, this movie literally starts in 1997, the same year as Titanic, with that famous scene of like Kathy Bates and the fork. I'm like, so in all that time, you never learned that there's like multiple forks at a fancy dinner. What have you been doing? This is the internet age. There's just all
Start from
these.
the outside.
That's almost like a Trump thing. What do you do?
We're,
No,
I know, right? Whoa. Triggered.
But yeah, so I had real problems with the adult version of this character, especially when we go back to the 12-year-old version and he's getting into trouble and then he starts straightening out his life. It seems like there's a big gap in him turning his life around as a young kid, but almost regressing back in this older form. I'm like, I kind of have to see that next 8 to 10 years between there to understand what the hell I'm missing.
I mean, I kind of felt like there's this. I get what you're saying about like, and maybe he was a different kind of, Marine or something. I don't know. We don't see a whole lot of him from that time, but I kind of see he's my favorite, probably my favorite character in the movie, and I
The
kind of
adult version of JD,
just
or just
both
JD. Okay. All right.
both, yeah.
Okay.
Because what I kind of see as a kind of a connective tissue between young JD and the college age JD is here's this sensitive guy who's kind of torn and trapped in a way with the way he was raised, the way that which he couldn't help, um, and his connection to eventually as he gets older, this connection to the past and how it haunts him, and how he's inevitably has to deal with his past, once like you said, his mother ODs and he has to go back to Ohio. um, I really felt for him as an individual, as a young kid, and also as a college age man. Um, that here's a kid who is just um, isn't really given a fair chance, of just being understood, of just he's not in a good environment, as he was being raised as a boy, but also I think that, yeah, sure, the whole phone call to his girlfriend during the dinner is a little. I think that is almost positioned too early. Like okay, where's this coming from? We're barely getting to know this person, and I feel like maybe if that was positioned a little bit later, like after we got to know who he is, it wouldn't be as maybe jarring. I don't know, but I feel like the movie has a really great intro to him, where the movie starts out at this, kind of like it seems like a traditional Kentucky, a family reunion type of thing.
Yeah.
They live in Ohio, but the family always gets together in Kentucky, where they're kind of for I guess decades the family had always been there, and that's really interesting. There's a kind of a narration from the main character, and we get a lot of information right there just by following him on that kind of summer day. But I guess you know as far as the adult JD, I feel like I felt I felt for him a lot more as the movie progressed, um, uh, especially towards the end when he really has to make these decisions. He's trying to find a way for his mother to be cared for, to be taken care of, to so she doesn't kill herself. Yet, yet part of me watching it is like, you just need to let her go, you know, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But also part of me is like, well, it's still your mom, and
Hmm.
regardless of how you're raised, your father's still your father, your mother's still your mother. You can't do anything about who they are, and it's a really it's a real tug of war. I dealt with that with my own dad. Is
Yeah.
just with his alcoholism, is you wind up becoming the parent and taking care of them. So I felt like that stuff with the what JD had to deal with, definitely in the third act, felt very real, and I felt like it was portrayed in such a way that was, um, you know, felt very true. Uh, but the rest of it, I mean, a lot of the movie is kind of peppered with this hysterics.
Oh yeah.
Just this the bigness of some of these scenes and characters. And you know what? Honestly, I'm sure it happened that way, but it's just like, whoa.
Well, it might have happened that way because I mean, it is a memoir, but it's also a memoir that is put together I mean, as all memoirs are, it's someone's memory of their life put together
Mm,
into a narrative form, and then it's filtered through a screenwriter and then through the lens of Ron Howard. So
right.
you're several dimensions away from reality, and part of that making it a theatrical experience is things like Amy Adams, stealing pills. She's got a job as a nurse at a hospital,
Hmm.
borrowing some roller skates, and then skating through the ICU. Now, it's filmed in such a way as to be ambiguous. I feel like there's going to be some people who are going to look at that and be like, wow, that's so crazy, as opposed to the correct reaction, which is this is kind of like a horror movie right
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that. It's almost in the title Hillbilly Elegy, it's almost an excuse to unwrap every cliche that you've ever heard about the South. There's the hubcaps popping off the old beat down car. There's the rednecks yelling.
Mm,
Early on, there's a scene where Amy Adams Beverly is out on the porch with JD, and they're talking about something. All of a sudden, they look over, and their neighbors. There's like this big fat guy, and he's yelling at his girlfriend, calling her a bitch, and like is almost
mm.
about to get physical. And Amy Adams' reaction is she's just laughing. I'm like, they're at it again. I'm like, what is going on here? It's like a whole nother place, as someone used to say. Uh,
Yeah.
but so at the same time, I want to believe I'm watching a textured, memoir from someone's real life experience that is a gateway for me who didn't live that life. I also wonder, did they actually live inside a cartoon? Because I don't buy half of this stuff.
And it's hard. That stuff's, I understand that totally. It's just kind of hard for me to say, okay, what about this don't I buy?
Hmm.
Because I guess my problem is, and I was discussing this with my wife afterwards, is like, how how much do we pick apart a movie that's based off a memoir? Because obviously, and I haven't read the book, but obviously this is based on somebody's life.
Hmm.
And yes, you're correct. It goes to a screenwriter, then a filmmaker, But it's like, okay, I could pick apart this movie, but at what point am I picking apart this guy's life, or how it's been portrayed, or how he remembers it, or how it's put together? It's like, you know,
Well,
I
and
yeah.
I understand where you're coming from, and it's weird to lay that kind of blame because I was kind of thinking about this while I was watching it too. Everybody's got a story.
Mhm.
Not everybody has a story that you can put in front of just anybody and say, I want you to follow this. I want you to care about what happens and care about these characters. I was reminded also of a movie that we've talked about at great length a few years ago, Manchester by the Sea, with Casey
Yeah.
Affleck's, spiraling
Mhm.
alcoholic character who burned his kids to death accidentally in the house.
Ah, spoiler alert.
It's 5 years ago or four, whatever. But that's the thing is I'm watching this and we come from similar backgrounds in the family regard. I had an
Mm.
alcoholic dad and,
Yeah.
constantly bailing him out and bickering and fighting and not talking
Yep.
for years and
Yep.
abuse and all that stuff. So I'm watching it partially with that lens. And
Mhm.
I'm like, he's constantly taking this abuse. And as he gets older, it becomes a little bit more difficult to take
Yeah.
because he's got the whole kind of ticking time bomb conceit of the film is he finds out his mom is OD'd. He races back to Ohio from Connecticut.
Yeah.
Uh, while he's at the hospital dealing with her, gets a call saying that one of the bigwigs of the law firm wants to see him for a follow-up interview at 10 a.m. the next morning. This is his big break.
The next
And,
morning.
yes. And he's thinking about it. He's like, well, I don't know. I'm like, okay, he's going to take the interview because that's the only way this Ron Howard movie can go.
Sure.
So that's predictable. And I guess that's fine. I'm going to see the high speed chase through the night at the very end of the movie. That's how it's going to end. If he doesn't, then I'm completely checked out. I have no sympathy for this guy. I'm like, he can just stay in that holler in Kentucky or Ohio, whatever, and
Yeah.
curl up and I'll never have to hear from him again. But on top of that, there's an attitude that his entire family picks up. It dissipates a little bit towards the end with Glenn Close's character, but it's this weird sense of entitlement. Like when they're at the hospital and they're throwing the mom out because she's been treated for the overdose,
She
but then
let
they
her
have
insurance go.
yeah,
Yeah.
she's like, they have to kick her out because it's her policy. And then the guy's like, well, there's some place, in town, there's got to be that will take her insurance. Can you help us find one? And they're like, she doesn't have insurance. And I was like, I just let it go. And like, again, these constant terrible decisions. I'm like, at what point does my heart stop bleeding and just say, I'm going to go over here and be productive?
Yeah. Yeah. And you say at what point? Well, it's watching this movie. It's almost at every point.
Yes.
But at the same time, we feel the struggle of this guy. It's like I would want to be so done with my mother, with my family. I mean, that's one of the reasons why he's in a different state. But
Yeah.
the thing is, if it wasn't for his grandmother, like you said, he wouldn't be at Yale.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah.
the struggle. It's like I want to be distancing myself from this family, but at the same time, my family kind of saved me, but it also destroyed me. So it's like, it's hard.
It is, and I think and again, this is, maybe this is true to the JD character who, however he wrote himself in the book, he doesn't come across as the most likable guy in the screenplay, because even when he's not dealing with his family, he's blurting that stuff out, inartfully at the big law dinner. When he gets on the phone with his girlfriend Usha, played by Frida Pinto, who
has not aged.
Seriously, and also. All right, this is so weird because it's the second Frida Pinto movie I've watched this week. Like in the last,
really?
Actually, in the last 24 hours, in fact, Night of Cups by Terrence Malick. She shows up in that. So that.
Please tell me you're going to talk about that movie.
I did last night.
Okay, good. I can't wait to listen.
Now, it's for another podcast. It should be out soon. This is a plug for that. Just to mention, I hated that movie when I saw it in 2015. I watched it yesterday.
No, don't tell me.
I am in love with that film. And part of that is thanks to our mutual friend, Sujiwa Akinyake, for introducing me to the world of slow cinema. I finally understand Terrence Malick, and I am ready to go back and rewatch The Tree of Life.
That's okay. Tree of Life and Night of Cups are totally different, but Night of Cups is not slow cinema. That is the kind of cinema where you're driving with somebody and they push you outside the car and you're hanging outside the car onto the seatbelt and they keep on driving. You're like, oh, please stop.
No, anyway. I disagree. I took up like 10 pages of notes in my notebook talking about the symbolism and all everything in that movie matters. I didn't think of that when I watched it a half a decade ago, but watching it again yesterday at 4 a.m. I started this thing.
Oh,
That's another thing. And I tell you something, I was dreading it because I'm like, okay, time wise, I have to start this thing at 4 a.m. The time flew by. Before I knew it, the 2 hours was done.
wow.
But that's another film entirely.
All right.
Plug for the Spoiler Room podcast coming out soon. What was I even talking? Oh, okay. So JD, when he's talking to Frida Pinto,
Yeah.
he has another phone call with her because she doesn't know anything about his family, and he's like, she's like, well, maybe I can come down there and help out. You know, my family's had medical issues, and he's like, my mom OD'd on heroin. Okay, do you really want to have to deal with that? And then he hangs up on her. I'm like, I don't like this guy really at all. At all. I
Well,
get he's had a hard life,
okay.
but you know, you come through the fire nice or naughty.
Here's what I saw about that moment is, you know, sometimes when you go back to your family, they only know you from how you were. And sometimes you subconsciously kind of like slip on the old hoodie, the old sweatshirt, and you slip into like how you used to be and how you used to be around your family, how you used to be treated by your family, and you feel kind of trapped in that sense. And I don't think he realized that he was kind of being a jerk and lashing out at her. But I almost saw the young JD in that scene. Like he was just like, why are you people like this? You know, the way he was with, you know, as a preteen with his family. There's just so much of this almost kind of this wounded animal feeling trapped and frustrated and helpless that just came out, you know. And I was kind of surprised that, okay, like you're with this girl and you never told her about the weird family you had. And I guess maybe I could understand that, but at some point you got to get deep with somebody that you're, you know, spending so much time with. But
I wondered, I didn't know how long they'd been together. And that's why I'm saying I feel like there should be another movie or like another hour in here exploring that middle chapter.
Because she was another character in his life who saved him.
Yeah.
You know, and who's very helpful to him, because she was so different from his family, and because she saw she was somebody who kind of like Mama, who believed in JD and who would be there for him. Now, you know, that obviously she was very different from his family. That being said, the character of Mama is very interesting, very complex, but also kind of cartoonish.
But possibly, but here's the thing, like at the end, I'm going to jump ahead
the end
here.
credits.
The end credits, when they do that thing where they show the real life people and you get to see Mama, I was like, that is Glenn Close. Like the pictures. And so when I'm seeing that, I'm like, okay, maybe this is nail on the head territory here. Cause even the real Beverly bore a good resemblance to, you know, Amy Adams, who had put on some, you know, weight and possibly some older age makeup or something, but a very effective job.
Eerie.
Yeah. But so it's interesting, you were talking to your wife about Mama at the halfway mark of the movie, because up until that point, she barely spoke. I mean, there were a couple of encounters like with the cops and everything, but mostly she was reduced to something would happen. She'd walk into the room and it's going to go.
But she would have these like zingers though. She wouldn't talk too much, but she would have these like line drops that are like, what? Where'd that come from?
It reminded me, what's the name? There was an old cartoon, like comic strip that they had on the Hallmark. It was like the old lady with the glasses, who was like the grumpy old lady. It was like
you see that, on, like Hallmark cards.
Yeah, it was like that, but filthy. But in the second part of the movie, when her character becomes more important to JD's story, she transcends that completely. And there is a scene, you know, if we want to talk about Oscar stuff, there's a scene in the car where JD he was in a Radio Shack or something. He tried to steal a graphing calculator. She bails him out. She buys a calculator for him. They get into a fight in the car. He throws it out the window. And when she sends him back for it, and they have this kind of, not a heart to heart, but like a good talking to in the car, that chills. And I was like, it's Glenn Close, but it's also not Glenn Close. I felt like I was
Yeah,
watching two actual people having a very important moment.
totally. I mean, Glenn Close and Amy Adams will get nominated easily. Yeah, I felt like there were definitely like bigger, broader, like Oscar grab moments from Glenn Close and Amy Adams, but in that scene that you're talking about, those were the small kind of nuanced character moments that I was like, wow, I wish there were more of those here.
Yeah.
You know, because it needs to be those kinds of scenes need to be balanced out with all the big hysterics. Because I mean, a movie just can't have uh, all of that, you know, that big broad stroke, big acting moments, and be taken seriously.
Yeah.
So that's where, at to a point, I get some of the criticism, but I think you have to, when you take everything that is offered here as a whole, it's definitely, there's moments that you just described, that one of the moments that you just described in the car there, which really kind of make you lean in a little bit closer and go, oh wow, okay, this is genuine, this is touching, this is real. Yeah, that being said, I probably would have stolen the $85 calculator too, because that's $85 for a calculator.
I remember
Remember
those.
Remember
Yeah.
this?
Oh,
Texas
yeah.
Instrument. I remember like looking at it and I'm like, how am I supposed to afford that? I know my parents can't afford that. What the heck?
Oh, and then and also, you know, I love the after effect of that, because I'm like, okay, how the hell did Mama afford that? And we find out later, to disastrous effect, like what she had to give up in order to buy this calculator. I'm like, again, I could watch an entire film about these two, you know, growing on each other. In
One,
fact, when
yeah,
Amy Adams left the movie because she was in, I don't remember where she was at that point. I think she was back with her second or
her
15th
third
husband.
husband.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, I was like, I kind of breathed a sigh of relief. I'm like, okay, I'm going to
yeah,
be able to get some actual meat on the bones here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because at least I feel like if we compare um, Amy Adams' character, what was her name again? It was
Beverly.
Beverly. Yeah, I
Hmm.
know you just saw it. If you compare Beverly to Mama, I think that there's more less hysterical moments with Mama, you know, and more kind of she's as she's as confused and dumbfounded by everything that's going around her as we are a lot of times, and it usually has to do with her daughter Beverly. But you know, I feel like there's at least something more to, you know, kind of like grab hold of with the dynamic, like you said, the dynamic between the grandmother and the grandson. Yeah, I found it funny though, because like, you know, you said that the things that she had to sacrifice in order to get, you know, that calculator. I'm like, there's that moment where the food delivery guy comes to her door, and this is at the point where, you know, JD's living with her and everything, and you know, the Meals on Wheels, and you know, she's asking for more food and everything, and I'm like, the whole time, at no point does anybody like quit their vices. Like, she is chain smoking throughout the whole
Yeah.
movie. I'm
Oh,
like,
yeah.
you can afford packs of cigarettes, but you can't afford food. And I'm like, look, I know, I mean, that's how a lot of people are. I get it. But it's just like, okay, where's the real sacrifice here?
Well, it's because she had mentioned, it was a really quick line of dialogue, but it wasn't just the food. It was the fact that I think she said that she hadn't been able to buy her pills that month,
Yeah,
likely because the prescription money she spent on the calculator. Yeah,
yeah,
I get that. And the
yeah.
updated version of that argument is, you know, how can you be so poor if you have a cell phone? And that opens up an entire different can of
Right.
worms, right?
Yeah.
You got a
It's
flat
a
screen TV in
burner.
your house, yeah. So, but you know, one thing that I think was kind of confusing, and when we talked about Let It Go, this might have been even off mic. but you had said that, or no,
let him go.
let him go. Yes, sorry, not talking about Frozen. Jeez. Actually, no, this was in the conversation. You were saying that some of the character development, particularly around Diane Lane's character, you had wondered if there was more depth in the novel. Now, I started reading the novel. I had to set it aside because I'm reading something else, but it's a very good book. It offers some more insights, but I kind of found myself in the same position with the Mamaw character, because early in the film, it's that scene where we see JD, the idyllic summer day, and then there's the lake, and then what happens, and then they all drive away. We cut to flashbacks of Mamaw running away from home at 13 because she was pregnant with the guy who I assume was still the father and the husband later in years. I almost thought the setup of the film was going to be kind of like a parallel between law school 12-year-old JD and then 13-year-old Mamaw, like a triptych of their parallel lives. That would have been
interesting.
Yeah, it would have been. But so later on, because it's a big romantic moment, them driving away, and she's like kind of full of hope, like I'm escaping with the man I love. Later on, when the old man dies in his chair in the living room, they break in, and you see this tender moment where Glenn Close leans down and kind of like just nuzzles her husband's head. I'm like, that's really sweet. You can tell they're all sweethearts and everything. But then, like, within the next half hour, we learn the truth that he was an abusive alcoholic who terrorized his entire family to the point where she actually set him on fire on Christmas. So I'm like, I'm getting like so many mixed signals about what's going on with this family here.
I mean, to me, it wasn't necessarily mixed signals. It was like, oh, well, that makes sense. You know, it just because they're so all over the place with each other that it's like, oh, okay, well, that puts things into context. It's like, no wonder they're so messed up. You know, it's like, you know, it's like she made mistakes, but a lot of those flashbacks are to help us sympathize with her. But at the same time, you know, yeah, it's complex.
But right, it's complex, but it's still messy because we see the old man in scenes leading up to that. We see him, you know, with the encounter with the police, with JD, and that awful scene with Beverly. He's kind of just this quiet, cucked out guy in the background. There's no indication of, again, like what happened 40 years ago to that guy to become this guy. They're still together. Was there a confrontation, an intervention? Did he change his ways? Did he find Jesus? Did he quit drinking? Is he still that guy and they just keep it quiet? Like, it's just, it's almost like a Tarantinoing of all of these different characters in order to cover up the fact that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that's why I'm wondering if I were to go read Hillbilly Elegy, which the more we talk about it, the more I think I'm going to next year, the more I want to know about like what the deal is with these characters in terms of JD's perception from his real life.
You know, I hear you. I guess I kind of like the way the grandpa, we'll just call him, was presented to us, because he is this, you know, through flashbacks and through some of the mentions of what he was like, you know, maybe let's say in his middle ages. I think it's Mamaw who's talking to JD about how he was. It makes sense that here's this kind of hollow shell of a guy, an older guy who's just kind of, you know, cooked out or harmless. It makes sense that he's nothing like the worst days that he had in the past. That, you know, he's just kind of settled into his ways. And because I mean, you know, I kind of knew old men like that, where it was just like, oh yeah, he used to be totally different. He's mellowed out, and he's, you know, it's not necessarily, you know, necessarily a come to Jesus thing or anything like that. It's just like, you know, he's mellowed out in his old age and he's not like that anymore. But to me, it didn't seem too jarring or anything. It just seemed like, okay, this is maybe something that we don't talk about as much. And that's something I can relate to too, because there's definitely family stories in my family that we just don't talk about that situation anymore. So to see him, you know, and a lot of the flashback scenes, they're kind of like shadowy, and we don't see like a young de-aged CGI Glenn Close or anything like that. You know, it's kind of like, it feels like memories, right? Yeah. Even though it's a memoir from JD. that whole being lit on fire and stuff. We see that from the point of view of Beverly. Because she and her sister are sitting on the stairs and watching this happen, and it really that flashback comes to light because JD's sister is reminding him, you don't even know, you don't even realize what mom and Aunt Lori or whatever went through, and then that's where that flashback kicks in, and so it makes sense that like there's probably things about JD's family that he doesn't even know about.
Yeah.
Part of it is because he was always different from his family, mostly, and part of it was because he left and he went on and had a totally different life than his family, and where his family didn't grow, just stayed there and didn't really change. But he did, and so there's definitely things about his family that took place before he was born and after he left that he just doesn't know about. So I found that those kind of, little, tidbits and flashbacks were, I think, represented in an understandable way. Sure, I could see how it might be a little bit jarring and somewhat messy, but I mean, that's kind of how family is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about like the language of movies. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I understand that especially when you're talking about that decades of long of history and the complications of family dynamics. But, I feel like as a viewer, I've got these questions.
Hmm.
You've got a guy who's a raging alcoholic and is abusing his family. Even after he gets set on fire, they're still together several decades later. I don't know that I'd still be with my wife if she set me on fire. I don't know that she'd still be with me if I was beating her and coming home, drunk every night. I don't understand that. And then
Hmm.
later on, especially when it's very obvious that his entire family is falling apart, he's such a non-entity that I don't know if he feels guilt about it. I don't know if he doesn't care. I don't know if it amuses him or whatever. It's just like you're dropping these little nuggets in that almost require a different story. Otherwise, I'm sitting there being distracted. Like this is just, again, it feels kind of like a narrative shell game. I'm paying attention
Yeah.
to this, and then I'm paying attention to this, and wait, that doesn't make sense. Oh no, look at this. Look at this.
And that approach to the storytelling, narrative of the movie, I kind of just adapted to and got on board with, just because I felt like we're still coming at this story through like, memories that hit this guy, our narrator, our storyteller. Um,
It is very Slumdog Millionaire, bringing us back
yeah,
to Frida Pinto.
yeah, right. And it's just kind of like, and that's, I guess, what I was talking about early on, is just this editing and the kind of a lot of the, even this, the camera work, cinematography is kind of jarring at times, where, there's that one scene where it feels like all of a sudden we go into the street and Beverly's hysterical. There's down the street, she's hysterical. She's in the street. She tried to slit her wrist or whatever. She's all doped up or whatever and going nuts and crying and hysterical and screaming about her father, which is just, at that point we knew that he had passed and everything, but I forget what scene was right before that, but it's like all of a sudden we go to that scene, and to me it's kind of how memories hit you. It's like, gosh, I remember that day where my mom was, you know, crazy running down the street. There was all this commotion, and I ran down the street, and I realized it was my mom. Um, I guess I kind of wrapped my brain around that approach to the storytelling kind of early on, and I just kind of went with it. Um, Speaking of the street, I thought it was really weird how it seemed to me, I don't know if you clued into this, that they were all living in the same street, but in different houses. Like literally, like the grandfather dropped off his wife at a house,
Hmm.
Mama,
Yeah.
and then dropped off Beverly and JD at a house. And on the same street, like I guess he lived in a different house. It's like maybe that's how they made their marriage work, because they lived in different homes.
That maybe, I don't know. I didn't
Maybe,
catch that.
yeah, maybe I was just, it just seemed that way, but I don't know.
Here's something that drove me crazy about the time in this movie. It reminded me of Deadpool because the entire first like hour and 20 minutes, and that was sort of the joke of that movie, is like the freeway scene where there's this like
Mhm.
this big action scene, and then Deadpool is narrating this giant flashback,
Right.
and we keep cutting back. It's like 45 minutes in, we're still in the first 5 minutes of the movie. This, I was so confused throughout this entire thing because it's that ticking clock thing of like next day is the 10 a.m. interview. But it's like, okay, JD pulls into town to see his mom and then bail her out. And then they're at a barbecue, and then they're going to a clinic, and then they're leaving the clinic. And then there's the guy throwing her stuff out on the lawn. And like, this makes the TV series 24 look like a regular afternoon. Like, so much happens that I kept having to remind myself, oh, this isn't the course of a week.
On the same day.
12 hours or,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. And then
Mhm.
he drives 10 hours back
No
to
wonder he doesn't live there
Ohio.
anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
I was constantly having to go back and reset my internal clock. And even some of that, I'm like, who has a barbecue like with they're standing around drinking beers, hang out with the kids? I guess it was a kid's birthday party, but it seemed like the chronology was like it was like 11 o'clock in the morning.
Well, remember
It's
she said that, oh, I got this thing. I'm a, soccer thing or something that I committed to throwing a party or something.
I know it
And he's
just
like, oh, okay.
yeah, it just seemed like a really weird time, especially because like a bunch of guys showed up with a bunch of beers. I'm like, what kind of soccer party game is this? I don't know
A
what that is.
hillbilly soccer party in.
In Ohio. Anyway.
Yeah, there's hillbillies in Ohio. They come from Kentucky.
That sounds like the name of a like an exploitation film. There's hillbillies in Ohio.
They come from Kentucky. Wes Craven presents. Yeah. Last hillbilly on the left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, look, it's a weird movie. I didn't hate it. I'm really baffled by the responses, like especially again, I didn't read the Collider piece, but it was like unintentionally hilarious, bad movie. I'm like, I don't know how I can watch this movie and really laugh. It's so tragic that I don't think there's anything funny about it. Even the broad strokes of the performance, there's nothing hilarious about this.
Honestly, like a couple days after, I think I saw this maybe 3 days ago, and it just kind of had this residue, depressing residue with me.
Mhm.
I was just kind of like, oh wait, that wasn't my history. It was just like it just felt like so it impacted me, and
Yeah.
that's not a sign of an awful movie.
Mm-mm.
I mean, it's not it's not a horrible movie. I mean, it's just there's some good performances in here. It's just like you said, I can understand the criticism. I can understand how messy it is and how kind of jarring it is here and there. And yes, we may see some Mama cosplay at some point. I don't know, but it's just like there really are characters like this, guys. This may seem big and broad, but there are people out there like this, And a lot of people are saying that, like, oh, well, this is an answer to the Bible Belt Trump supporters that this is the movie for them, and this is why this economic disparity, this is why they voted for Trump. I'm like, okay, fine, you could project that onto this all you want, but
The movie takes place in the 90s,
well, I think that the book was a big hit like right around 2015 2016, if I remember right. But
it was, yeah, it came out in, yeah, I think he graduated in 11 and it came out in 13 or 14, something like
yeah,
that. You're right around the mark. Sure.
yeah,
But, and I haven't read the book, so
but
I
that's
don't know
just
if
a
it's a big
stretch. I
economic.
mean,
Yeah,
come
it
on.
is a stretch.
Yeah. And I think that's just kind of a projection of like, well, these are the people who voted for Trump. I'm like, come on, no, there's a lot of different types of people who voted for Trump.
Yeah, some of them live in the north, It's,
yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is some of them are your family members, So I don't know if I don't know if the criticism comes from there. I don't know. It's like people are really, I don't know. I think this movie could find a decent audience. And I think if you're not used to seeing big kind of Oscar grab type of movies, this you may be totally fine with this. Um, Definitely, I think that people are going to be saying, "Oh, this is Ron Howard's Oscar grab, Oscar bait performances that Ron Howard is giving us here." I'm like, yeah, sure. Aren't there those types of movies every year though? It's like, okay,
Yeah, I mean it's almost like crowd pleaser, popular entertainment has become, they've become dirty phrases. Like everything has to be
yeah,
highfalutin and about like 16th century,
hmm
scholars or mathematicians or something.
yeah. I
Um,
mean, what
there's room
what
for
if?
all of it.
Yeah, I mean, what if this was the first movie for somebody that actually uh, gave them an opportunity to put themselves in somebody else's shoes and be more empathetic towards people. You're not condoning their actions, but you're like, oh wow, that's why and how this person is the way they are. Um, Beverly's has an addiction problem. Is it because of what she saw growing up? Is it because of her family environment? Is it nature nurture? Is it both? You know, you kind of emulate what you learn and what you see around you. So,
And going back to that missing movie idea, the kind of coda over the end credits when it talks about what happened to her, I'm like, no, I want to see that. I really want to see, like, was it that scene in the motel that did it? Was that her breaking point where it's like, okay, now I got to turn my life around? Or did she go through a few more years of these kinds of episodes before something
yeah,
happened? Like, it's as much as I think she was kind of, big and unpleasant to watch, not Amy Adams, but just her character
yeah,
throughout
yeah.
the movie, I was still very interested because the worst thing I thought, I was waiting for those titles to come up and be like, oh, and Beverly OD'd,
Mm.
in a gas station in Columbus or something 2 years later.
You would expect that. I
Yeah.
mean, that wouldn't be too surprising. I think what people maybe aren't realizing is this could have been a lot more stereotypical than it is.
Hmm.
Like I really appreciated the character of JD's sister and how she was portrayed. She could have been, you know, you know, a lot more cartoonish or drawn a lot broader. But there was this kind of tenderness that she had with her brother because of what they endured and survived and are currently still enduring and surviving. But she never left, whereas JD did. So she is more kind of used to uh all the turns that her family takes, like every day, every weekend. um Whereas he is not as used to it because he's left. But I found that I was kind of surprised by her character and how she still had this kind of, I guess, somewhat of a resolve, or maybe had developed somewhat more of a thicker skin about her situation and her environment. It's not perfect. She's not perfect. You see her initially when we first meet her. She's on the phone with JD and she's yelling at her kids to shut up, and then she's like, "I'm sorry for yelling at you." It's like we see a little bit of that. And again, maybe that's something that she learned from her mom, and her mom learned from her mom. So it's like you feel like the sister to me represents somebody who's trying to get out of their situation yet is still living in their situation.
Yeah.
And I feel like even the way she was portrayed, I forget the actress who plays her,
Haley
but
Bennett.
yeah. I think that she did a really good job at a character that could have been maybe a throwaway character, or just oh, here's a hillbilly sister. you know I thought that there was some depth to her. And then when she said, um, you mentioned how we left Beverly in that hotel room. It's like, JD had to leave. He had to drive back late at night, to make that 10 a.m. meeting, and he's like, I forget the sister's name, Lindsay. He's like, Lindsay's going to come after work and check on you. And you just, first of all, you hope and pray that Lindsay remembers. You hope and pray that Beverly doesn't leave the hotel room. And it's just like you're right. It's like we leave her in that hotel room, and we never really knew what happened until the end credit scene. But I was kind of glad that it didn't that character of Lindsay didn't turn out to be this kind of like stereotypical, I don't know, sister who maybe had disdain for her brother leaving a long time ago or something.
Yeah, I mean, she definitely understood. And I think there's a lot, going on in the corners of the movie with her character because, the other route, and again, this is based on true story, but if this were filtered through more of the Hollywood sausage, factory, she would have found a husband, or her husband would have been an abusive jerk,
Abusive,
and
yeah,
going through the whole cycle and stuff.
yeah,
But no, it's like she's learned all those key lessons from her mother and her family dynamics, and she's done as much as she can to actually get out without leaving town.
yeah.
And she's trying to be a good mom. Yeah, I think I've been a fan of Haley Bennett for a while, and
Hmm.
I'm glad that she's getting something more profile like this, because she's one
Yeah.
of those actresses or actors, when I see them, I'm like, should be more in more stuff. Like, come on, let's get it
Wasn't
going.
wasn't she in that Magnificent Seven remake?
I think
I
she
think she
was.
was. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, she
She
was
was good in
also.
that.
I knew her from music and lyrics and the Joe Dante movie, The Box.
Oh
Um,
wow. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
both worth checking out. Yeah.
What do you think of that whole? I mean, there's some montages in this movie, right? There's the one montage that we saw coming where the young JD kind of gets his act together once he's living with his grandmother and starts doing dishes and starts taking out trash and gets his act together. It's kind of like a Rocky montage, but there's this other montage that just feels like, oh, we got to put this in there, and it was that the long drive home back to Yale is like, okay, this is where I'm gonna connect with my girlfriend and dump all this stuff about my family history. I'm like, okay. I mean, I've been in a situation where like I got a long drive, I need to talk to somebody to keep me awake,
Right.
and I turn to my wife, I'm like, this is something that you would do. You'd be on the phone with me, trying to keep me awake. And she's like, not current me, but younger me, yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, it's like good luck, crank the music, turn on the window, I'm going to bed. But
Right, because
younger,
at one
but my
point, yeah,
younger wife would do that.
yeah, because at one point he says, oh, it's late, just go back to bed.
Yeah,
my
yeah.
wife too. Today she would have been like, okay,
Good luck.
call me after the interview.
Right. So that part just seems like, oh, okay, this seems really not just like shoehorn, but okay, here's the inevitable. Let's get to know my family through a long drive at night and stuff.
And that's the weird thing, is this movie doesn't strike me so much as Oscar bait, although I agree that's probably what it is, as almost like a dark after school special. And it's just got that kind of tone, even with some of the music, which is by Hans Zimmer and another composer.
Right.
You do have that kind of a feel to it at some point. And yeah, that montage of him, like he gets a job in the grocery store and all that stuff, it's very sweet, but it's also very TV.
Yeah, it's sweet, but then there's those jarring moments of like, oh my gosh, she's beating up on young JD. It's like that scene in the car was like, oh my gosh. I just kept on thinking, I'm like, I immediately just thought about like, how was this filmed? Like how many takes did this take? Because it was like, it was so intense. It's like, ugh.
Yeah. And also, tonally, there is a moment where there's a total switch, because he bolts out of the car after fighting with his mom. She's like hitting him and punching him. He runs away and goes to
A stranger's house.
a stranger's house, and she lets him in because like this boy's got a,
Yeah.
he's all upset. And then the mom comes charging up,
Like,
and then the lady says, go away, don't try and come in here, I have dogs. Cut to, there's two corgis in the kitchen. I'm like, what are you doing, Ron Howard? That's not this, none of this is funny. None of it.
yeah, it is. There. It's like quick, like totally weird moments, but
Yeah, it was like something out of Family Guy or something, but
it would have been funny if Seth MacFarlane directed this movie.
I would kill to see Seth MacFarlane's Hillbilly Elegy.
Oh wow, that would be great. So honestly, I mean, Amy Adams and Glenn Close have not won Oscars yet. This could be their movie.
Wow.
Fine, and it is amazing to think that they haven't won Oscars. I mean, I'm glad she didn't win for Albert Nobbs, which is decidedly a crazier, more cartoonish performance than Mama. But I mean, Glenn Close deserves an Oscar. I don't know if it's for this movie. Maybe this win will be a career win. I don't know. Amy Adams has been so good. I mean, for so long. This could be where they'll definitely get nominated. This could be where they win too.
And yeah, I can see if either of them win for this movie, they're being outraged because A, this movie made it to the Oscars in any capacity, and B, they won for these performances. But I'm honestly not, the problem I have with Amy Adams in this movie is mostly in the writing and what she was called upon to do. I think she executed, brilliantly, even though it made me uncomfortable. And Glenn Close, like I mentioned, that car scene alone, if Judi Dench can win for 45 seconds of being in Shakespeare in Love, Glenn Close can win for that 3-minute car scene.
Yeah, totally. And I think that those glasses that she wore the whole time should just go into the Smithsonian or something, because those are just like, what the heck?
But all right. So I think that's pretty much covered Hillbilly Elegy.
Yes.
We talked about it way longer than I thought we were going to. I'm like, what's there to unpack here? It turns out a lot. So I guess that's the mark of at least an interesting movie and not a laughably bad one.
No. We even touched on Terrence Malick. So
yes. Or even, hey, Terrence Malick's Hillbilly Elegy. There'll
be a lot of wheatgrass and touching and of the wheatgrass.
Yes. All right, sir. Well, thank you again. This is the middle episode of our thankful week with the subject being family. We'll actually be back with the Black Friday family episode, which we recorded a couple of weeks ago, kicking off the Christmas season in a very unique way. So that'll be fun. Thanks again, sir, and we'll be talking more movies very, very soon.
All right, I'll see you soon. Thanks.
Later.
Bye.
Bye.